So my final project was on an experiment in a study titled Ego Depletion is the Active Self a Limited Resource? The original experimenters had at first hypothesized that self-restraint is a skill that can be improved with practice. So by having participants practice an original act of self-restraint, they would then perform better on a second act, even if it was unrelated. But their results showed the complete opposite. So they concluded that self-restraint is a limited resource, and that the initial act of self-restraint depleted that resource, so less was available for the second act. My study, I repeated experiment 1 in the original study, but I made a few key changes. For one, the original researchers used an unsolvable puzzle for the second task, whereas I used a section of the GRE. I wound up eliminating the control group. In the original study, the control group and the chocolate group did not really differ, and I had a limited amount of subjects, so that's why I deleted it. And I wound up using 4 groups. I had graduate students and non-graduate students, so I separated them into 5 graduate students in the chocolate condition, 5 non-graduate students in the chocolate condition, 4 graduate students in the radish condition, and 4 non-graduate students in the radish condition. Every participant was isolated in either a cubicle or a room with all of the food options, and they were given the brief mood introspection scale and told to eat their assigned food, fill out the scale, and then summon me afterwards. I then administered the GRE quantitative section to them, and I explicitly told every subject to take their time and feel free to quit at any point if they became frustrated with the task. What the subjects didn't know was that I had set 10 minutes as the maximum amount of time, so at 10 minutes I interrupted them. Also, the GRE test wasn't being scored. I was only using it to measure the amount of time they were willing to spend on the unpleasant task. And the brief mood introspection scale was also not measured. It was only used to help the subjects focus upon the initial task before proceeding to the second task. This is a graph of my results. And the graduate student sample performed as expected. Those in the radish condition who had initially had to practice self-restraint to eat the radish instead of the chocolates dropped out of the second task far sooner than the group that was allowed to eat the chocolate. However, my non-graduate student sample was completely different. Every single person stayed for the full 10 minutes regardless of their condition. These are my results. They were significant, and a Bonferroni correction indicated that the grad student radish condition was the only group that was significantly different from the others. So it seems like the graduate student sample kind of confirmed the original researchers' conclusions, although it's also possible, since I didn't have a control group, I can't really tell if the chocolate condition was more likely to stay just because the chocolate made the task less unpleasant. But my non-graduate student sample showed no effects. And that may have been because they felt challenged by the GRE and they were more inclined to stick with it regardless of their food condition. There were a lot of limitations in the study. For one, a lot of the non-graduate student sample, a lot of the people told me that they misinterpreted the intention of my study. They thought I was kind of comparing graduate students to non-graduate students intellectually, and they stayed longer just to prove themselves. And the original researchers had used a camera to make sure the people in the radish condition didn't sneak in any chocolate, which I wasn't able to do, although I don't think that was that much of a limitation because they didn't observe anyone sneaking chocolate. So But the biggest limitation I had was that I set my maximum time at 10 minutes, which created a ceiling effect, and the original researchers set their time limit at 30 minutes. So if I had used the full 30 minutes, I might have observed an effect in the non-graduate student sample. And also, I kind of unintentionally split my samples by using the GRE, because the graduate students were familiar with the material, but the non-graduate students weren't familiar with the material. So if I had used the unsolvable puzzle that the original researchers had used, I might not have observed the same effects in the non-graduate student sample.